for a review of what's making the headlines in these papers this morning. We'll bring in our ever insightful analyst, Dr. Constance Ikoku. She's back. She's on fire. Bigger, smoother, fresher as ever.
Benga de fire. I said Benga de fire. Can you imagine? Benga Ashiru. I beg
We
your
missed you,
pardon.
actually. We missed you. It's great to have you back.
My gosh.
How was the break?
It was fantastic. Good to see you,
It seems
Benga.
you're having
And,
the last,
and Yolanda.
the last
Thanks
rest
for having
and the
me back,
best
Dr.
rest.
Constance.
I did have a good rest. Good to see you. How are you anyway? How was
We're
everything?
good. We're good. We
we're
managed
good,
to pull
you know.
through.
Yes, exactly.
That's
Yeah.
the spirit.
Yeah, that's the spirit. And on a Monday, fresh day of the week. All right, let's look at those stories that are shaping the agenda for you today. Hello there and welcome to the program. We'll be kicking off with this day newspaper. Several leading papers highlight economic sector developments today. There's also politics and social issues, sports and national pride, healthcare and public outrage over the death and alleged negligence at a Lagos hospital tied to widely respected public figure, Chimamanda Adichie's son, among other stories dominating public discourse today. Now, this day writes about two Rivers State Assembly members having a rethink about the impeachment plot against Governor Sim Fubara. Differences over the new tax laws are smoothing out or are being talked about following a meeting between the National Revenue Service and KPMG officials. Now, former governor of Sokoto State, Aminu Tambuwal, says fuel subsidy removal and flood polls is responsible for Nigeria's economic distress. Moving on to Daily Independent, which reports on widening credit gap as banks adjust to a high-rate environment given CBN's prolonged tight monetary policy. This is happening in the midst of a potential spike of inflation to 31.92% before easing sometime this year. In Rivers State, we've seen that lawmakers are asking their colleagues to halt that impeachment. And leadership newspaper leads with death of Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie's son as lawyers back Abakoba's call for healthcare regulation overhaul. Sanwo-Olu Obasanjo mourn Oba of Badagry, who has passed at 89, and U.S. revokes over 100,000 visas, including thousands of student permits. There's tight security in Kano State amid imminent defection of the governor, Abba Yusuf. Vanguard newspaper has gone with recommendations from experts on how Nigeria's manufacturing sector can grow this year, while Atiku, PDP and CUPP rail against crackdown on dissent ahead of 2027. The Punch reflects on the crash of fuel import spending, which has crashed by 54% in 2 years. It underscores a significant easing of foreign exchange outflows linked to petroleum product imports. This was due to a series of structural reforms and market adjustments that were aimed at easing pressure on the country's external reserves and stabilizing the naira. Daily Sun reports on the federal government spending 11.5 billion naira on pilgrimage. The Guardian goes with another expenditure piece where the government is expected to spend 1.978 billion naira on fuel generators this year. That is just fueling generators, I guess, at the presidency. Then gunmen kidnap 8 in Edo State and demand 100 million naira ransom, while the new Awujale is expected to emerge next month as kingmakers screen 86 nominees. New Telegraph goes with Nigeria's budgetary process and approach, which critics say must change. Now, let's see international headlines, starting with the Times newspaper. Today's papers are dominated by national security and defense stories, domestic tech and youth policy with social media restrictions, legal cases with political angles, environmental and economic cost debates, health services spending, and global finance governance stories. So the Times lead with a major national security story. UK elite soldiers may be deployed to target hundreds of illegal oil tankers evading sanctions. This comes after a new legal basis for such operations was established. It reflects a growing concern about Russia-linked shadow fleets and maritime sanctions enforcement. And then Americans are also being asked to flee Iran as protests turn deadly. Our newspaper highlights a government consideration to ban social media for under 16s, modeling Australia's restrictions on young people. Daily Mail runs a front-page story about a man winning substantial compensation from Britain over his imprisonment in Guantanamo Bay, with a huge backlash over that compensation. The Sun covers a domestic energy shift. Diesel fuel is set to phase out of UK petrol stations within about 4 years as part of net zero strategy reporting. That seems very soon, imminent. The Daily Telegraph reports on China's plans for a concealed chamber next to sensitive communication cables in London. This is raising intelligence infrastructure security concerns. And then moving on to Daily Express, which warns of a net zero project that is going to cost £9 trillion, citing official underestimates for renewables and EV transitions. Financial Times lead with former U.S. Federal Reserve leaders uniting in criticism of the Trump administration's criminal probe of federal chair Jerome Powell. This highlights global financial governance tensions. And UK Chancellor, or former Chancellor Zahawi joins Reform UK. The Guardian has Iran downplaying protests as anti-US crowds rally against the Western power and Trump. Now let's break down what the stories mean for the everyday citizens. Returning to this day newspaper, 2 Rivers lawmakers are now asking for the impeachment to be halted, and South leaders they've inaugurated a reconciliation committee. Benga, do you reckon this is enough to save Governor Fubara at this time?
It's starting out to look like a face saver for former Governor Nyesom Wike, because if you look at it, I think looking into their accounts and weighing the gravity of the evidence, I think perhaps on the second thought, they realized that that may not stand the test of the process of impeachment plot being invoked by Section 188 that insists that any plot must be a petition based on substantial gross misconduct of the governor or the deputy. So I haven't looked at it because Section 122 gives the governor that power, that waiver to still spend for the next 6 months. And this is a budget that was signed by the president and was ratified by the National Assembly. So because the extra budgetary spending seems to be the central point of that allegation against Governor Fubara. So we've seen a lot of support coming in. And also in the political realm, I think Governor Fubara seems to be taking some very subtle moves that that has a far-reaching impact on his political future and also on his political survival. He seems to have learned some lessons and is now part of the APC. So it seems that if you look at it seems that's a game changer for him, and it's not surprising that Pandef and 2 lawmakers are saying that, okay, he has committed a crime, but let's forgive him. I think we should let system work, and we should see if anyone who has breached the law, and if the state assembly is being frivolous, we should also be able to call them out at the end of the day.
Let the system work.
Yes, that's an interesting reaction there from you, Benga. Dr. Constance, what I found really interesting going through this entire report is what former Ekiti Governor Ayodele Fayose actually said. He says that only spiritual intervention can save Fubara from impeachment at this moment. And I found that very interesting because Fubara's stance has been very calm. We spoke about this yesterday, Benga.
He's always calm.
Exactly, he has been always calm, but will he be able to weather the storm with that level of calmness this time round? That's the question.
Is it about calmness? I mean,
he's taking it in his stride.
He has his own character.
Yeah,
he's a mellow kind of individual, which is one of the reasons why some say that he's not your typical politician. In fact, he is not a politician. He was just given that position of governor, and so he is in the midst of it, and he has to find his way around. However, the plea by 2 members of the Rivers State House of Assembly shows that there is a lot of dialogue and pressure going on behind closed doors from all sorts of people, leaders in the state, leaders outside of the state, the party members as well, on what this portend for Rivers State. You can also see that there seems to be a fracture that is opening or that is deepening within the Rivers State members of assembly already.
Indeed.
All of them are no longer in sync or in alignment on what needs to happen in their state. There has been a lot of controversy. The president has intervened. They had tried initially to impeach the governor, and that is why one of the reasons why the president intervened and called brought in someone to administrate the state for a while. So what we are seeing now is clearly a push for a compromise that will bring about political stability over confrontation, because at the end of the day, confrontation has not proved to help Rivers State. It is not going to help Rivers State at this time. They're expected to resume plenary soon. So when they resume plenary, we will now be seeing what steps they decide to take after this plea from these two members of
because it has serious consequences on relegating governance, serious issues of governance to the backstage and leaving the state under serious political uncertainty.
From day one, it has not no peace. So what kind of governance has gone on in Rivers State all this while?
I don't think they have that luxury of taking that step that would further plunge the state in a state of wild gamble. I think it's a political gamble for them to embark on that process of impeachment. I think that is not the step needed for that kind of fragile state that has been turned into crisis in the past.
So when they say temporary justice with mercy, so you're in support of that?
I think that is a very responsible statement to say that tempering justice with mercy. For you to say temper justice with mercy, it means that there is a prima facie evidence that he has indeed breached the law. So he has not even appealed himself. He has not admitted any guilt. So you can't be tempering justice with mercy in that kind of circumstance. I think it's quite hypothetical.
We'll be watching their next line of action, and we'll be bringing that to you. Let's start with this day newspaper. Former governor of Sokoto State, Aminu Tambuwal, says fuel subsidy removal and flood poses responsible for Nigeria's economic distress. He particularly mentioned flood policy choices without a framework by this government as a major problem. In addition, a compromised electoral process that does not reflect the will of voters poses a big challenge to Nigeria, he argued. And the way and manner fuel subsidy was removed, we've talked about that the whole of 2025. It's not a new narrative at all. However, he thought on public confidence on elections being completely eroded. This is something to look at. It does mirror general concern about the 2027 elections and what will happen, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think he's saying this on the heels of his 60th birthday. Yes. Congratulations to him. The APC has also responded. I think that we discussed the issue of the process of removal of the fuel subsidy. And I think that in all the submissions, I think Alhaji Atiku Abubakar's submission was, I found most appealing, because he said it will be a systematic withdrawal. We saw the knee-jerk approach that trailed the immediate removal of fuel subsidy when the president came on board in May 29, 2023, and when he said fuel subsidy must go. That came with immediate hardship, hike in the price of fuel, hoarding of fuel, and also you saw what happened in the unification of Naira. So we cannot afford to be taking such process of wide gamble. The labor unions were not carried along. And talking about the threat to the 2023, to the 2027 election, I think it's important that we discuss this. It's very disturbing that we still have not addressed the pitfalls in the electoral landscape, which is the need for IREV to be properly imputed in our electoral constitution, in electoral act, and also the need for an electoral offences commission. We've talked about punishing electoral offences, but how do we drive the political will without an institution, without an effective institution to address many of these pitfalls.
There is a point to be made about the 2027 elections and the level of worry that is being expressed by Nigerians. And we will see more of that in our next story. If we can pull up Vanguard newspaper, Atiku, PDP, and coalition of united political parties warn against crackdown on dissent ahead of the 2027 elections. Atiku says repression, intimidation, and a cycle of fear cannot be allowed to fester. This is particularly in relation to the detention of Abubakar Salim Musa, a young Nigerian who has been detained over criticism. In light of this, Atiku said there cannot be free and fair elections under a climate of repression. On its part, the PDP said the government does not accommodate dissent, excuse me, and the critics who refuse to align are subjected to threats, intimidation, which is a strategy to weaken the opposition. And that's why when you see many states that are moving to the APC and individual politicians that are defecting in droves, it just mirrors that general sentiment that the government is not a government that is open to dissent. The civic space rather is being is shrinking. You know, we saw last year when there were so many protests or some protests within the country, how the police was used to clamp down on protests. It became almost impossible for people to express what they believe in within a democratic system or democratic process, and that poses a problem for the country.
I think that this type of story requires really in-depth analysis and really to look within and decide whether this is pure politicking or if there really are valid points in these statements, which I believe they actually are. Now, according to Atiku Abubakar, he says Nigeria is dangerously close to authoritarian rule if these patterns keep occurring, just as you've rightly said, Dr. Constance. And that's how last year in April of 2025, you know, that's when we saw this coalition kind of forming with the likes of Atiku, Obi, Nasir El-Rufai. We saw all of this coming together. And although there's been quite some backlash because people have varying opinions, and you know, even just yesterday, the interview that we had with Chief Dele Momodu, there was a lot of speculation as well that came out of that. You know, Atiku is a strong candidate, but also people have come to criticize his way of thinking as well and his stance. So there's so much to break down through that. That's why I mentioned that it's important to analyze whether this is pure politicking, even though there are some very pertinent points that he has mentioned himself.
Well, you know, suppressing protests may in the short term seem like it is a good thing in order to engender political calm. However, in the long run, what it does is that it drives people underground, but it continues to fester, and one day it resurfaces in the guise of, in the form of whether it's protests and total unrest and political instability, and it leads to a fragile state. And you can say that over the years since independence, what has happened is that you have a Nigerian state that uses brutal force to clamp down on its people whenever they are unhappy with what is going on, with weakness in government, with lack of governance. And so you think that in the short term that, you know, you're doing the right thing, but you're not, because those things continue to fester. Absolutely. And they come back again. And we've seen people agitating for a different state, for a different country, and all sorts that is going on in the country. So that is usually not the right way to handle politicking or politics or governance in a democratic setting. There are also economic implications. Economically, repression will scare investors. A country that is seen to be, clamping down on genuine, legitimate protests of the people, people will be worried to come in to invest, and we have seen what is happening, and it might even lead to isolation.
I think what Atiku was trying to raise was the perceived selective approach of the anti-corruption agency going after the opposition. I think that if they have questions to answer, and I think that this is being informed that in the culture of impunity, accountability seems to be an attack. And I don't think that should be the right approach. If someone has a question to answer in the courts, he has the right of fair hearing.
Right.
We should allow for an open and transparent prosecutorial process. That was why I said that the former Attorney General of the Federation, not granting him bail, will be a trial of the media, detention, and prosecution. But now that we've seen it, the case will be held this month, and I hope that the judgment will be very unbiased. I love to see institutions work, and the triumph of effective institution in delivering an inclusive democracy that will capture the aspirations of the Nigerian people, especially the masses.
Leadership newspaper, death of Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie's son, Nkanu Adichie Esege. Dr. Lisa Bakoba's son has called for a swift overhaul of healthcare regulations. Lawyers say lack of effective regulation and enforcement mechanisms has emboldened some practitioners to compromise on standards. And this has devastating consequence for patients. They have called for strengthening of regulatory framework. Such a sad story that happened very recently. Like in Anthony Joshua's case, this incident has struck a deep national nerve because it exposes systematic weaknesses within the healthcare system. It's not a case of a single tragic error. It's systematic, and we've seen it every day. But the only difference is that those people that it happens to, the victims, are not superstars. They are not public figures. They are everyday people. So the case highlights long-standing concerns about patient safety in public hospitals. So the message and the lesson here is that no family is insulated from institutional failure. It can happen to anybody, which is why a win and improvement on the system is an improvement for everybody. And beyond the personal tragedy also, I think the episode is a broader test of whether the Nigerian authorities will investigate this, conduct an independent investigation, and also make sure that if anyone is responsible for failure, that person is brought to book.
Yes, and we spoke about this quite in depth as well yesterday, Benga, and I think it has been a reoccurring conversation over the past couple of days. A part that is a real thorn in the flesh is the level of negligence that is actually involved in this case, because what was meant to be a routine procedure turned out to be fatal. Something that was supposed to be simple, straightforward, in preparation for travel plans in the next few days became something that ended in death. And that's very unfortunate. Just as you've rightly said, Dr. Constance, this is just one of many, many cases. The senior lawyer who is in charge of the case, as you mentioned, Olisa Agbakoba, called medical negligence, and she has been taking, they have been taking over 50 similar cases. I think this was what was stated in the report. I believe also the Lagos governor stood up and said, listen, we need a thorough investigation where this is concerned. And I think at this point in time, according to the latest updates of this report, the hospital is currently being served already a legal notice. So it's a very unfortunate situation. We hope that lessons are learnt and that these type of situations that can be very well avoided are not repeated in the future.
All right, let's move to the international headlines. I think that story is in the Times, where it talks about Iran. Iran anti-government demonstrations have turned deadly. Hundreds of civilians killed and thousands detained. In fact, there is a shutdown of internet, and they said that if the internet wasn't shut down, it's possible that there are thousands, not hundreds, of deaths.
Yeah, we watch with very disturbing view on the rising cases of casualty. The last report I heard was that out of about 30 provinces in Iran, about 17, the unrest had spread to about 17 of these provinces, which is now becoming the largest since the clerical rule since 2022. When you look at this, it has some overlapping implications, because the Iranian authority are saying that this is politically motivated and that the U.S. is triggering this crisis. But from the inside story, we see a people that are protesting about the high cost of living, the devaluation, following the devaluation of the currency, and also the extreme hardship that had followed this case. We also see the U.S. also threatening other countries. That is where I found most spurious. About 25% sanctions on any country that is having a trade deal with Iran. I think this undermines the importance of national sovereignty.
You mentioned
in international politics.
31 provinces. It actually is 31 provinces.
Indeed.
And to put it into perspective, could you imagine if 31 states of Nigeria all of a sudden broke out into full mass protests? It would be a very scary situation for that nation. So looking at everything that's happening in Iran right now, plus not just these sanctions on the US, from the US is also threatening, just as they said with Nigeria, for boots on the ground, to also bring, you know, gun violence to Iran if these protests persist. So it's a very strange way, because we are seeing a story that is very pregnant with so many angles to it.
Yeah,
I mean, is the US now looking at itself as a type of world police officer that comes in to police what people are doing? Earlier as well, we spoke about how Venezuela is now being, Trump is calling himself the acting president of Venezuela. I mean, which way? What are we looking at here exactly?
Well, what we see is that when President Trump came into office, even his first time around, he had echoed the sentiment of many Americans that America was over-involved all over the world, policing the world, spending militarily and financially across the world, and they wanted a pullback. And President Trump promised to do that, even the second time around. But he has flipped that card completely.
It's not the case anymore.
Yeah, it's not the case anymore. He's now has gone into Venezuela, literally kidnapped a sitting president, and he has done that without the approval of Congress, which is why there is a discussion in Congress now about the powers of a sitting president of America to do so much without approval from lawmakers. And so we have also seen what is happening in Iran, where he's threatening a potential strike or involvement if this continues. As it relates to Iran, there's nothing new there, because Iran has always been a country that is very, very anti-American, and they stand up for themselves. There was that strike against their nuclear weapons last year that devastated it to an extent. They have suffered sanctions over so many years. It almost crippled their country or the economy, but they managed somehow to continue to fight and to stand up for themselves. So now there is that protest against Ayatollah, the spiritual leader Ali Khamenei, and which they are wanting to go back to what they had before, the Shahs. That is a complicated history, but we're going to see how this plays out. However, American history and records show that, you know, too much involvement becomes a problem. We saw how they pulled out from Afghanistan in 2021, how that was a crisis or complete devastation after 20 years in that country.
I think you mentioned something that is very, very instructive. You talked about the nuclear issues that they have with US. I think they've had this decades-drawn pressure on Iran to drop its nuclear ambition. And I think that this is an undercurrent, surreptitious way of dealing with that threat coming from Iran.
So we'll see what direction will be. They have already said there will be targets of American targets within the country and Israel as well. So what will happen is that there will be a mix that becomes a regional conflict, potentially. Those were your headlines today.
Very interesting conversation there. Thank you very much, Dr. Constance and Benga Ashiru. You're watching.